Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About It, a podcast created by the Fuse, an outreach initiative within the College of Applied Studies, and recorded on campus at the Elliott School of Communication here at Wichita State University. I'm Bobby Berry.
And I'm Jessica Newman. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing social justice, both on campus and within the greater Wichita community.
Right, and there's a long list of topics that fall underneath the umbrella of social justice. So voting rights, healthcare, racial injustice, the income gap, gun violence, hunger, and food security. We're going to be looking into equity, access, participation, and rights. To help us further the discussion of social justice, we are joined by Dr. Selena Jackson, who is a staff psychologist and a group therapy coordinator in the Counseling and Prevention Services Department here at Wichita State University. Welcome, Dr. Jackson.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Also joining us is one of Wichita City's council members and Vice Mayor Brandon Johnson. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, glad to be here and glad to join you all.
All right. And so, Dr. Jackson, if that's okay, we'd like to start with you. So could you just tell us a little bit about your background and what your role is at WSU?
Sure, yeah. So originally coming out of the University of South Alabama is where I got my degree from in clinical counseling psychology. And so I joined Counseling and Prevention Services in 2018 here at WSU. And really my role is, like Bobby said, staff psychologist. So I see students for individual therapy, couples counseling, group therapy. I do a lot of coordination with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We do like a monthly Real Talk where we talk about different topics that are relevant to diversity issues, and do some coordination with international education, different things like that, care team. And so really just making sure that services are being coordinated and we're providing the best care that we can for mental health on campus.
That's wonderful. Brandon, let's turn to you now. So what does your position as Vice Mayor, what does that consist of, and how are you actively involved in social justice efforts in Wichita?
Yeah, so Vice Mayor is actually a position that rotates on the City Council every year. The Council elects a Vice Mayor to serve a one-year term. And what that really means is additional work duties for me, additional meetings with county leadership, business leaders, joining the mayor, in a post-pandemic or pre-pandemic world, at events, if the mayor can't make it, the vice mayor will show up on behalf of the council to those events. The main job, though, is council member. So I always say vice mayor and council member representing District 1. And it's just a grind every day trying to meet the needs of the community, address issues, and look at equity. And my role in social justice, a lot of folks know I was an activist before being in office, so these are issues that are near and dear to my heart, fights that we had beforehand, whether it was law enforcement, whether it was equitable spending with the city, making sure that we address the true needs of low-income communities, black and brown communities, the impacts generationally of redlining, all of those things kind of come together in a lot of the work that I do, I guess, in short.
Thank you.
That's a lot. I didn't know you did all that, Brandon.
Yeah.
Dr. Jackson, let's dig a little deeper into the importance of discussing mental health and how that relates to the black community. So according to a study done by Dr. Thomas Vance, the black community suffers from increases in mental health concerns, including anxiety and depression. So how do we demystify and bring awareness to the mental health needs within the black community?
Yeah, I think, the big key of that is what you're saying, demystifying it. Like, what is counseling? Like, what does that even look like? Mm-hmm. A lot of people have very stereotypical views of what counseling is, and so really getting the education out there on what they can expect when they call in, what they can expect when they come to their appointment, what kinds of questions they're going to be asked, and that the questions are standard and not targeted in some kind of way. I think, just historically with healthcare in the African American community, there's, been that concern of, am I just going to be mistreated? Is it fake? Like, is it real? Like, what is going to happen? Am I going to be, diagnosed with something when something's just relevant to my culture and not understood? And so really, I think having having events where, we try to get like mental health into the communities where people are at, instead of trying to put that pressure on people to like go to this place that you're not familiar
Correct.
with. So if we can be in healthcare centers, healthcare settings in schools and things like that, where we're bringing resources to people. That's been a lot of our focus here on campus, as well as trying to, encourage our student body to like connect with us through social media and other resources, and also going out into the community and some of the local high schools too.
Do you feel like the stigma behind mental health in the Black community has improved over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years? And do you feel like we're going in the direction where it is getting better and people are talking a little bit more openly about it?
I would say we're heading in that direction. I would say that from students that I talk with, there is that generational difference where they are seeing that grandparents, aunts and uncles don't talk about mental health and the outcomes of that, of it being kept secret in families and things like that. And they are talking about it more of like, how can I support my mental health? How can I support my self-care? Now I'm checking in with other people because I know that our culture doesn't necessarily talk about it. And so making that more intentional, I have seen that shift.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. That's really interesting, thinking about bringing it where it's needed versus having people go, come into a place where they're uncomfortable. It's just a way I've never really thought about it, I guess. So that's interesting to me. Okay, so Brandon, a lot has happened over the past year and a half nationally, including, of course, a global pandemic, and then increased prevalence of racial discrimination and tension, particularly related to police brutality. And we should clarify that what we've seen is an increased publicity of these racial tensions. We do have. Let's just mention it. Brandon's little child is here with us today, which we all know. I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, so we've got a guest in the studio. So if you hear anything, that's what it is. It's just our special guest, VIP guest, no biggie. So these racial tensions we know are nothing new. They're things that have been going on for a long time. But we have seen an increased publicity of what's been going on in the media spotlight, really more now than ever before. Based on all of that, my question for you is, when we turn our focus to Wichita, how would you say the pandemic and related, the racial tensions on a national level, have impacted our own community here in Wichita?
I would say there was a big impact. When we look at last year, we had immediate rallies, we had protests, folks who had their own Wichita experiences. So a lot of what I have talked about throughout the last year was, yes, there's national issues, but we also had our own issues here in Wichita. We had individuals who lost their life to law enforcement officers of the Wichita Police Department over the years. Some of those have been high profile in the swatting incident. Others didn't make national news, but definitely upset folks here in Wichita. And we had folks who are still upset and families impacted by that. It's been a weight that I think many of us Black folk deal with. I've seen a few who haven't, so I won't say all Black folk, but there's a lot of Black folk who just, you see us being targeted, you see us being killed, you see us being harassed, you see the justice system working differently for us than it does for other folks. And I think that weighs on the conscience here. So anytime there's an opportunity to unify in ways that we saw last year to support just Black life, I think there's an impact. And last year's was the first time in my lifetime here in Wichita there was sustained protest. Normally there's something that happens for a weekend or maybe another weekend, but last year for about a month and a half, there were protests, there were rallies, there were meetings. It was putting a strain on police resources. They were always out dealing with this. And I think one of the differences with Wichita and the rest of the country is our police department actually listened to the community. They came out, the entire city council, and this actually didn't make the news, but the entire city council, the DA, city manager, county manager, 2 members of the county commission all went to a rally together and listened. And that was the key, was listening and trying to see what the the needs were, the demands were from the community, and then trying to work towards addressing that. So I think the things nationally impact here, but I've always tried to focus on Wichita. So yes, we can be mad about what happens in other places, and we should, but what are we going to do in Wichita to make sure that doesn't happen? That's always been my focus. And what can we do to reduce those opportunities?
Now, I'll come back to you here in a second, Brandon, but Dr. Jackson, when we look at the Black student population here at WSU, we know it's been a trying year for many. So between COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement, that has really stirred up a lot of its emotions within the Black community. Specifically, what have you been seeing on our campus regarding the mental health of our Black students lately?
Yeah, I would say, long story short, people are tired.
Yeah.
If we just cut right to it. People are tired. People are frustrated. I think, people in some situations, are feeling like they want to be at everything.
Right.
They want to be part of every social media post. They want to be at every rally, informing people, educating people. And then the backside of that is that's a lot of work.
Right.
That's a lot of effort. That's a lot of strenuous, just mental energy that goes into that. And, it's two sides of a coin. You have like the one side where we are seeing sustained engagement over the last year or so. But the backside is that sustained engagement for people to have to navigate through. And, people feel guilty if they're not at everything. Mm-hmm. And so, I always, talk with students, when they bring it up, and I'm like, I feel the same way. I mean, I'm at, most conversations, at most things, and I definitely can resonate with a lot of that. And really talking about okay, how can we make this a marathon and not a sprint for you, where you feel like you're going to burn out at some point. And it's if you need to step away, that is okay. It is okay to give yourself that space and that grace to be what, today maybe isn't the day, and to it's okay. I think that's what a lot of students are trying to wrestle with. It's when is it okay for me to say that maybe I'm not okay right now,
right.
And I need to make sure I check in with myself first.
One of the interesting things that you had just alluded to is your positionality, mm-hmm. and the fact that being a Black woman and being in the profession that you are, and with our current state of the world, how has that been for you personally, mm-hmm. navigating as a professional, trying to be there for other people, but then also mm-hmm. being impacted directly yourself?
Yeah, I've had to get more intentional about using my PTO, definitely. And yeah, I think, I think about this, and it's both. I'm in this role as a professional, but then, I go out into the world and I'm just
right.
me.
Absolutely.
And people don't know what I do unless I tell them. And
mm-hmm.
then, sometimes we see the conversation shifts, or it changes, or tone changes. But there's some tension there with living in that space, and then feeling just taking care of myself when I'm trying to make sure I'm at everything for students too,
right.
at the same time. So it's intentionality of when do I need to step back to.
And with that being said, have you noticed an increase or decrease in Black students utilizing counseling services since the pandemic and the rise in racial tensions within the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I actually looked at that just kind of from fiscal year to fiscal mm-hmm. year, and so between last fiscal year and the current one, we have seen an increase mm-hmm. of Black students coming for their first appointments mm-hmm. with us. So, I take heart in that people see us as a resource on campus, especially with the pandemic spreading everybody so thin most of the time, that they are, willing to connect with us, and we're trying to make sure that people do have access, and we're not creating extra barriers for folks too. So we have seen that.
And just that mirroring image of what we're seeing on campus versus that in the community, Brandon, when I was doing some prep for the show and I was looking at some of the statistics within the past year, they're staggering. So homicides are at an all-time high. Suicides increased by over 70% over the last year. So knowing those stats, how does that impact the intentionality of how you serve our community, that is obviously hurting right now?
It intersects in a few ways, so I'm glad we're talking about mental health and taking that break. The pandemic, I think, really highlighted the need for that. And what we had been doing even before the pandemic and before the murder of George Floyd was trying to figure out a way to reach young people and talk about better ways to communicate, better ways to conflict resolve things. So rather than reaching for weapons and using those, what are ways we can actually talk things out? And even, going to the politically unpopular direction of, if you have to get physical in some way of problem solving, there's a few gyms like CDH boxing, like go in there and have someone who has actually lived this lifestyle talk you through this, train you. Maybe in that you find a way to conflict resolve and nothing happens. If you have to do anything, learn how to box. And then at that, at the end of the match, everything's over. Don't go grab weapons. Those are different tactics that we tried to use, and we tried to get innovative in dealing with that. With the pandemic, forcing folks to stay at home, the toll on mental health, not allowing some people to kind of get out of that house, have that break. That part's been tough, and we've been trying to work with law enforcement on ways to address that. One of the things I always talk about is just being neighborly. So knowing your neighbors, knowing situations going on, talk to one another. If you see that there are some issues there, reach out. Going back to the village that raised me. If I was ever out doing something, I knew two neighbors would call my mom and grandmother. So I was, I had them on me. I had my grandmother on me. If it was that bad, they might call my dad. My dad was there. The pastor was there. You just had that village to really help out and try to intervene. So it's looking at things in an innovative way, really trying to push though real mental health, real communication, dealing with the individual, and then trying to put aside differences. A lot of what we have seen, especially here in Wichita with some of the violent upticks outside of suicide, is just disagreement or, looking at drug transactions. And I think drug use even went up because of the mental state and some of the depression around the pandemic. So when you have someone who wants more that they can't afford, does that turn into like a robbery that ends up with a shooting? All of that stuff is what we're talking about right now. I'm really trying to find a way to address it on the front end or intervene in a way that, doesn't lock people up for life, but, tries to show some alternatives.
Absolutely. And so, I was talking to Dr. Jackson, at least about her positionality, and we'll dive a little deeper with you a little bit later. But as an individual who is raising Black children in this community, how has this last year impacted you as a parent?
As a parent.
There you go. I've been more intentional about my words with my kids and talking to them about just the different perspectives and different life situations, and even this youngest one who is 2, she sees that, she hears the conversations that we have with her big sister or her big brother, and again, just highlighting that, sometimes you're dealt certain cards. These are things we have to deal with when we look at injustice, when we look at just how people are impacted through policy. These are conversations that we're having. And then, just trying to teach them that I'm not one of those aspirational, I hope the world's different for you. I tell them, you got to make it different. You don't have that luxury to hope, as I've heard some of our elders say, they wished our generation would be different. I tell them, you got to work at it. You got to make sure that you fight systemic racism. You have to fight these discriminatory practices, and one day your fight might be over, but until then you have to fight. And Danielle and I try to live that example. We fight for what's right and try to get things changed, and that's really been how we've shifted our message, outside of just, do your reading and all of that stuff. But, on the social side, will you be silent and complicit when challenges come up, or will you fight? And they see us fighting. So hopefully for them, that's an example. And I'm already seeing it in my son sometimes. I'm seeing it in Aria, who's her big sister. And the way she is right now, not listening to me when I asked her to be quiet, I think she'll be doing the same thing too.
She's just independent, right?
She is, very much so.
And, thinking about that, we know that every person in Wichita doesn't have the same lived experience. Of course, we all have very different experiences, and a lot of that depends on where you're from, who you are, things like that. So our city, of course, is mapped out in districts. And when you look at the different districts, and I think I know the answer to this, but do you see disparities between districts where most of the residents are underrepresented minorities and districts where most of the residents are white? And if so, what are those disparities that you see?
Yeah, I see it, but it's by design. So I brought up redlining earlier. There was a map, and I attended actually a workshop here at Wichita State. Dr. Michael Waters from Texas was here, and he was talking about redlining. I'd always heard about it. I knew what it was, but I'd never witnessed what it really meant. So there's a map that you can Google, 1937 map of Wichita that was redlined. All of the redlined areas are your areas right now that have the highest need. And so that's downtown Wichita, that's northeast Wichita, that's southeast Wichita, that's parts of southwest Wichita, and over to almost Riverside. Those areas to this day are either highly gentrified or still poor, and that's the areas where you have the highest needs. Those are the areas where you don't have a lot of generational wealth, because home ownership really wasn't a thing for folks back then, at least the quality homes that were evaluated in a way that you could pass it down and it would help you out. Those are the areas where I've been trying to work with my colleagues on shifting to equitable spending, not equitable, so we can invest more into those areas to address those issues. These are the areas that are stricken by food desert. So it is racial, I think, in nature systemically, but a lot of these areas also have a lot of poor white folk as well. And that was part of the redlining, getting your poor white folk, which was still a class higher than your poor people of color, and then just putting them all together in that way. So we have a lot of work to do just to build out from that government-sanctioned discrimination of the 30s, 40s, and even up till today. And we're just now really getting to a place with policy where we are making some good investments to change those things.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, Dr. Jackson, these events, this work that's being done, this trauma that is being endured by so many in our community, obviously has lasting effects. So, as a psychologist who knows, about effects of trauma, what do you think are going to be the repercussions of what our Black students have seen and have experienced over the past year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is broken up into like different categories. You kind of have like the physical health of people dealing with trauma, trouble sleeping, trouble eating, just like their like heightened arousal, that jumpiness, the edginess, that could maybe even play into more stereotypes, if it's not understood through the trauma lens of what people are experiencing, recently and just generationally. And then just kind of in interpersonal dynamics, people see who makes posts on social media. They see what others in their environment think about certain things that they may feel really strongly about, and that carries weight to it. That carries, a perception of the world around them. And it's easy to say that somebody is like, okay, well, everybody thinks like this then, or everybody thinks like that, and it makes like broad generalizations when, like you said earlier, we all have our own lived experiences. There's a lot of difference in that, and people have their perspective based on what they've been through or what they've seen, and trauma plays out differently in different people. Some people can go through last summer and not feel traumatized. They just kind of roll with it. Or, they are very, very affected if they know someone who has, died from police brutality, or, gone through different things, or they were at a riot or a rally or whatever it might be, or they weren't there. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it will come out in different ways, but having people be aware of what they might experience can give them a voice in how to maybe, advocate for themselves or for relatives or for other people going forward.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting, and something that you had said, Dr. Jackson, is, everyone responds to trauma differently. And
Right.
These issues that we're seeing, they're not new. There's just been a heightened level of awareness over the last year, but definitely something that I feel like we are going to be feeling as a country and as a community for many years to come. And so being proactive and reactive, really, on both ends, about making sure that we properly address these things and that they're consistently topics of conversation going forward, because the healing and the work to heal really never ends,
Right.
Yeah. And so Brandon, like we mentioned, the trial over the death of George Floyd is happening as we record this podcast, and we are approaching May 25th, which is the day of Floyd's death. And so it is more than just his death. There have been so many others who have died. And as a Black man, how has this last year impacted you in your positionality in the role that you have as vice mayor?
Yeah, I think this last year might have been probably my toughest year dealing with all of this because of my government role. As an activist, I was always out there when something happened and trying to work with community. But this last year, I still haven't watched that tape, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I can't. I think I've watched maybe 20 seconds of it. I just can't stomach that. But this last year, I was also kind of the lead for the city on addressing law enforcement issues. That was what I did as an activist. And then throughout all of that, the governor appointed me to chair CPOST, which is the organization that certifies law enforcement or can remove their certification in the state. So I had that on my shoulders and trying to balance dealing with the demands coming from the community, the actual city's response, trying to work with my colleagues to work through that. I knew that there were things being said that, because I try to understand other perspectives, may have been hurtful to them or offensive. So trying to weigh that versus how I was feeling, seeing another Black man being killed, being proud of the Black unity I saw, while at the same time, I'm also now the government. So what are we going to do about it? It was tough. It was tough to deal with that. And I truly, like mental health wise, never really took time to myself to check in with me. It was always, how can I respond to the Black men and women reaching out to me? How can I explain to my white counterparts, not on the council, but even in the community, that this stuff is real?
Yeah.
And then doing that, and I went to a few conservative churches and spoke to them about, what Black Lives Matter really meant, where they may criticize the organization, I would say, but Black life does matter. So there's a movement, there's an organization. If you are critical of such, this is how we might feel about that. And again, never really taken time to check in with myself until almost August, and that was forced on me by my wife, who was like, we gotta go.
Yeah, no, not Danielle.
Yeah. And she was out there too. And I'm also weighing being a dad of Black kids, the toll that was being taken on my wife. And then in politics, there was a campaign going on. There was a picture of me and the chief, my wife, one of the candidates, all praying. That was used as an Black Lives Matter, we want to tear down the city type ad. And I'm looking at it. You can clearly see me in there. They tried to darken it a little bit, but everybody knew that was me. And that was there. So just weighing all of that, man, it was tough. And I think I really just started processing last year, here in the last month or so, because I try not to let things tear me down where I'm not ineffective, because I also have this pressure where I see an elected official, this isn't a permanent gig for me. So like if folks don't like me this year, I'm done in January. If they do, I get another term. But either way, I'm a temporary inhabitant of the seat, so I have the pressure to deliver anyway. And then being a Black man in office, I can't just be a good council member. The community has so many needs and wants. They look at you as everything. So if we're mad at the federal government, Brandon, what are you going to do about it? And whether I can do anything or not. So it's just all of that balance, all of that kind of hit at the same time last year. And we had the Black Alliance, which was trying to respond to the pandemic and its impact on the Black community. So I just had all of that going, and I've got a virus that's a killer of black people at a higher rate than anyone else. And then we have this law enforcement issue, and then we have ongoing community issues, violence in the community. All of that was going on at the same time, and I just went into respond mode, and I just worked. And that wasn't healthy, so I encourage people not to do that. But that was what worked at the time for me. But I'm still looking at, man, that was a crazy year. It was a crazy experience, and it hit me differently. I didn't just have a pandemic to worry about. I had everything else going on.
I often wonder, does the Johnson family sleep?
Yes, I've wondered that too.
Every now and then.
Well, we want our listeners to know how they can help the Wichita community. So, Brandon, what are some opportunities our listeners can be involved in to continue to make the greater Wichita community thrive?
The thing I always encourage is reaching out. Not every elected official cares if you reach out. Not all of them will respond, and that's any level, not council. I think the council for the most part responds. But reach out, ask questions, give your thoughts. That's emails, that's phone calls, that's showing up to meetings. And I always tell folks some of those meetings are boring. I'm there, but there's a lot of information, and sometimes you get upset because you see a final product and you don't realize it's been talked about at these meetings. And if you weren't there to engage or give input, then you kind of missed out. Try to get appointed to boards. Always talk to young people, especially young people of color. Young as defined as under 40. But, even young teens and early 20s, but try to get appointed to boards. You have a say-so in the city of Wichita. If you're like on our transit board or our library board, you shape the direction that it goes. So try to get involved in that way. If you see a council member, doing something detrimental to the community, speak up to them and let them know what's wrong with it and how you want to see things go. But the biggest thing is just to engage. If you don't know where, reach out to me. I plug in at any level, state, city, county. There's page opportunities for the state legislature where you can be around Representative Finney or Senator Faust-Godot. We don't have real internships on the city level, but if you want to hang out with me for a couple days and see what's going on, happy to do that. She's not happy right now. But yeah, it's just engaging, plugging in, and then invite us out. If you send an invite to something, we'll show up. I tend to show up, and I want to hear from folks. One of the cool things, just as encouragement, because I talked about going to boring meetings, our aquatics plan is a $22 million plan. It would have been a $12 million plan, but we were fighting to save the McAdams pool, now Charles McAfee pool. And one of the things I did was I went to schools. So these kids can't vote. I went to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. I asked them what they wanted to see in the pool, and it was just one simple question. Do you want a box full of water, or do you want, what do you want? And they said slides and climbing walls and basketball goals and all that type of stuff, the sprinkler jets. Well, that's what our plan is, and it's because they spoke up. Now, I went to engage them, but I would always encourage, if you don't have that elected official there, go engage that official, because something like that, you can impact it. So it's because of those young folks that the plan is like that. If you go to 17th Street, the new 17th Street development on the north side of McAdams Park, you'll see a baseball bat in the sidewalk or the crosswalk. A young person at Lee Overture designed that.
Oh, wow.
So we try to involve young people in those decisions. We've got a few more projects where young people are involved. There were young people involved with the 9th Street development, the mural that's on the wall there, and some of the artwork in the street. Young people did that. So I just say, if we're not reaching out, then reach out to us. Try to make your voice heard. And then ultimately, run for office. There's too many folks that think you got to be 60 to go run for office. You don't. We make decisions for the future of Wichita now. We're talking about the riverfront. So if you're a young person and you think all the ideas you've seen are stupid, or something that wouldn't attract you, and you're still looking at leaving Wichita, run for office. Get in there and be that voice and represent your generation and your ideas and the things that you think will make Wichita cool. And although people told me I was too young when I ran, I won. I'm here. So definitely do that. Know what you're talking about. Definitely know the seat. Know your powers. What you can and do. Run a realistic campaign. Don't promise the world and you can't deliver it. But run for office. We need to see more of that. We need more young people in office to change things in the way that we want to see. There's a few graphics talking about Congress and everybody being over 65 and these people in power. Nothing wrong with that, but they don't see the world the same way we do. Yeah. So we should be in those seats, and we should be the ones saying this is where the investment should go. This is where our country should go. This is where laws should change. I mean, even here in Kansas, there's a few things, and I don't know where everyone sits on legalizing marijuana, but you have folks who are young who are saying one thing and an older group saying different. And everyone's looking at the medical benefits, and then there's no consensus because it breaks along age groups and then it breaks along party lines. You don't have people in office that are actually really doing research, real research, to see what real impacts are there. And then you don't have people in office that actually reach back out and engage with folks who could be impacted. We just saw that with some of these bills around masks. We saw that around engaging with schools. They're not talking to administrators. They're not talking to teachers. They're just doing what they want to do. So we need folks, and I see the younger generation, they'll ask you, what do you think about this? How is this going to impact you? That's the stuff that I do. Everyone I've seen in office that's a young person or aspires is out talking to people. We need that mindset shift in the legislature. We need that mindset shift in many offices, but we don't see it. And a lot of us are being impacted. But it's hard because, I got my daughter here with me today. Younger folks, you got your families, you got your little 2-year-olds running around. You really don't have time for that. But when you can make time and you can get in those seats, you can make a real difference by doing that work, and we need more of it.
Absolutely.
Some excellent words there. And I love to think about those children that you asked about the pool and what they wanted. I love to think about them growing up because they're going to remember this as the time that they got asked about something that was happening in the government. Like, that's huge, And it might seem small to some people, but I feel like that probably changed their mindset for the better and for the long term. And I think that's really cool that you thought to do that.
Yeah.
As kind of a closer, Dr. Jackson, just same basic question for you, except related to the Wichita State community. How can we support our Black students and our students in general? How can we help support given everything that's been going on and everything that we're going through?
Mm-hmm. I say communication is huge. Communication, checking in with people, not in a micromanaging, hovering type of way, but just out of genuine concern. It's hey, I've noticed, if it's academic, hey, I've noticed, your academic work doesn't seem to be where it has been, or, you haven't been showing up. I just want to check in with you. How are things going? Are you needing anything, any support? What can I do? And just asking what people would like instead of just offering and inundating and flooding people with things you think they might want.
Sure.
And so then it's personal for them. And then, we always say in the counseling center, we don't expect other people to be anyone else's therapist. That's our job. We take that on and we're happy to do it. And it's, helping people get connected with us and supporting them in that way. Whether that is, coming and walking with somebody over to an appointment or whatever it might be. But really just that communication, especially with COVID and the pandemic and being so spread out and people, being in isolation so much more than what is really healthy in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And so we've seen that with people really struggling with their mental health and their motivation and just, daily life activities. And then you throw, racial tensions on top of it and cultural things on top of it and all of these other pieces that people are trying to just carry and then figure out how to pay bills at the end of the day, figure out childcare at the end of the day. And we want them to do finals and midterms and, put on, maybe a mask for a lot of people and pretending that they're okay. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of safe to assume that all of us might not be at our okay at this point. Right. And really just checking in on people more so than maybe you have in the past, because we can assume that because someone's always been okay that, well, they should still be okay. Mm-hmm. And the world's just not set up like that at the moment. And so I think really just that communication, connection with people, making it personal and not in a very stereotypical carbon copy kind of way. Like, we are just generally like, how you doing? Do we, mask up and go like sit in a park somewhere and just check in, or what do you need? And I think that can go a long way for people, just to show that we're human with one another, and not that everyone has it all together or something. Like, people assume that just because you look like you do, you may not.
I heard someone say something that was really interesting to me that I'll never forget. They said, it's the people that seem okay. Those are the ones that you should be checking on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think oftentimes, kind of like you had alluded to, sometimes it takes a lot of work for someone to make it look like they're okay.
Yes.
And so sometimes that weight of being the person who's always okay, that weight within itself can be a lot for someone, because they don't want to be the person to say, I'm not okay, when everyone's used to them being okay.
Oh, yeah.
And then that added pressure. So great point there. But once again, I want to say thank you to Dr. Jackson and Brandon Johnson for joining us. And Aaron, I'm not going to leave you out. So thank you as well for being here today to talk to us about social justice and what it is, and how we can improve. I know you both are very busy because you guys are tapped for a lot. So we appreciate you guys taking time to be with us today.
Yes, thank you so much. I personally am very encouraged by the fact that both of you highlighted so dramatically that what all of this takes to help push us forward is communication and talking to people. And I think that's something I've learned as a faculty member in this past year, is I have found myself thinking like, okay, so what do my students need? What is this student, what's going to help this student? What's going to whatever? And then I stop myself and say, why don't you just ask them? Like, stop trying to assume you know what people need. And it occurred to me that that's something that we all do way too often. So I was very encouraged and inspired by you both kind of bringing that up. So yes, thank you very much. I would echo all of Bobby's sentiments there.
So as we continue our conversation on social justice, we have two new guests joining us to give us their perspective. First, we have Dr. Kevin Harrison, who is a community engagement coordinator here on campus. So welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Thank you.
And we also have David Garcia, who is a student here and the director of public relations for the Student Government Association. So welcome, David. We're excited to have your perspective today. And let's just start. David, we'll start with you, kind of some the rapid fire basic questions. Could you tell us what year you are in school, what your major is, and maybe just a brief idea of what you hope to do once you graduate?
Yeah, sure. So I am a senior here at Wichita State. I'm about to graduate this semester. Very excited about that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very, very excited. Thank you. I majored in integrated marketing communication. So I actually am a student of the Elliott School, which we're in right now. Very excited about that. I'm hoping to go into like PR and marketing for nonprofit organizations. I really want to work for an organization that I'm really passionate about and kind of helping spread the word of the work they do. So that's what I'm hoping to do once I graduate.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So as Director of Public Relations, what are your main roles and duties, and why is that role something that you chose to pursue here?
So as Director of Public Relations for the association, I kind of act as like the main spokesperson for the association. I'm like a press secretary, if you want to compare it to like politics in general. I handle all communications and media relations. So anytime the Sunflower wants to reach out, do an article, I'm kind of their main point of contact, or even with, our local news outlets like KSN, KWCH. We just recently got done doing an interview about a resolution we wrote about some Kansas state legislation. So there's a lot of outreach and engagement with that, but also a lot of it is just peer-to-peer, student-to-student, making sure we're getting the word spread to students about what we are doing as an association and the work we're doing on behalf of the students, but also kind of getting their perspective as to what we can be doing. What do we need? Sending out, social media posts, any just form of communication to see what the needs and wants of our students are.
Fascinating. For some reason, I did not know that is what you did over there.
Yeah.
Very enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kevin, your career did not necessarily start in higher education, but now here you are working in the area of community engagement, if you will. So, can you tell us exactly about what your role as community engagement coordinator consists of?
I do my best. I think to understand my role, it requires first understanding the social climate of really the nation and the city of Wichita, and then acknowledging that the university over time has mirrored these climates throughout every era of its existence. So you take a look at slavery being abolished in 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, and then you have 1886, 21 years later, Wichita Ladies College is formed, which was the first conception of what we call Wichita State University today. Then each conception thereafter, you have Fairmount College all the way up to 1926. Then you have Wichita Municipal College all the way up to 1964, and then from 64 to now, we have Wichita State University. And through each of those eras, racism and exclusion has become less socially acceptable. So we've kind of morphed into what Dr. Eduardo Bonilla Silva calls racism without racists. And so with that, we had to realize that the racism has been kind of embedded within the fabric and the structure of society, and the university is not exempt from that. They've played a role in that, and I think Dr. Bardo realized that, which kind of led to me in this role. And my role was to really go out and try to form relationships with people that are already working to kind of champion diversity and inclusion and equity for all of these marginalized populations who don't fall into the category of white, heterosexual, Christian males. Because if you haven't fit into those four categories, you've been excluded from something in this society. And so with that, we went out and we started forming relationships with a lot of different organizations. I guess community space has become more popular, and also with leadership changes at the university, my role has kind of changed. And so right now I primarily work with just one entity, and that is Textron Aviation. And I oversee 4 programs that they finance through the university. One of them is the Tenacious Men. You've helped me with the Tenacious Men in the past, Bob. Right now we have a group of 19 third grade young men of all nationalities, and it's a STEM focus. Most of these young men come from populations, whether it be, ethnically marginalized or socioeconomically marginalized, guys that typically don't get opportunities, and it's a heavy STEM focus. There's a multimedia focus. There's a creative arts focus. We meet with these young men twice a month on Saturdays. We also bring some mentors from the community to visit with them on some things. Then we have No Veterans Left Behind, and that is actually led by Lieutenant Colonel Burks, but I kind of am the one who creates the reports and present back to Textron what we're doing with their money. And 2 things that we have underway is kind of reigniting something that we had that kind of lost its luster during COVID, which was the diversity ambassadors, where we had students, because students see the university from a perspective different than what we do. So we need eyes and ears, because the students are the lifeline of any university. If they're not, they should be. And so we want to have student eyes and ears to tell us what diversity looks like from their perspective and what things we need to be looking out for. And then one of the things we'll be launching real soon is called the Whisper Initiative, and that will be designed to get women really a fair shake in things that they're often excluded from, which is math and science. There's this misconception that women aren't as strong as math and science as men, which is not true. And so we want to kind of help debunk some of those stereotypes.
So needless to say, you're busy.
Some days.
Yeah, some days, right? So our guest earlier in the podcast helped us to discuss the impact of social justice, or lack thereof, on our mental health. And we also talked about needing to belong and be involved. So with that being said, Kevin, why do you feel community engagement is so important to the success of Wichita State University?
That's a tough question to answer, because to a certain degree, I think community engagement has the ability to be just as destructive as it does helpful.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, it really just depends on how you define community. And historically, in a lot of spaces, community has been defined, as I stated before, white, heterosexual, Christian males. And there are a lot of people who aren't those 4 things that get excluded. So I think we have to be very intentional when we talk about community engagement, that we're also talking about diverse and inclusive community engagement. If we are able to do that, I think it can be really powerful in turning centers of oppression into centers of hope and centers of empowerment. I think it gives people a voice who historically haven't had a voice. And as we look at the future of the university, the more perspectives that we have, the more viewpoints we have, the more people that are included, we create a lot of net positives. We create increased enrollment, we create healthier communities, we create more diverse employees, more diverse professionals, and I think everybody benefits and everybody prospers. So hopefully as we move forward, and we see a lot of exciting things going on around the university, hopefully as we move forward, all voices are included in all these excited things, and I think if we do that the right way, we can see, really community of empowerment for years to come.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, and really mirrors a lot of what, David, you and your colleagues are doing in SGA. You guys have the very important role of being involved in some of the main decision making on campus, and over the past several months, you guys have really been working on addressing that need of diversity in the classroom and what that means and what that looks like here. And one of the initiatives that you guys have been working on, I know, is the Sga Diversity Week. So I'm wondering if you could just let us know kind of where this came from and why you and your colleagues felt like this was something that needed to be prioritized right now.
Yeah, sure. So I came into my position at the end of last school year, so last April, and very quickly under Student Body President Richard Kahn and Student Body Vice President Mackenzie Haas, they sat us down as a group, as a cabinet, and we talked about our main issues that we want to address, our main goals that we're going to focus on. And this topic of addressing diversity in the classroom kept on popping up because we all feel it's incredibly important to have that educational component. I feel like a lot of it is community outreach and engagement oriented, but it's not really brought into the classroom as much. There's a lot of classes that are designated as diversity content, but that's really broad and overarching, and it's not every student is going to come to Wichita State and have a class like that. And we believe that going to a university is an incredibly socializing concept, institution. So why aren't we addressing that? Why aren't we telling our students about these different identities and perspectives and experiences? It's incredibly important to know that, to build capacity in regards to empathy, conflict resolution, understanding. And we feel as though that students are going to be going out into the workforce, and if they don't know how to work with a diverse network, that's going to cause a lot of issues for them. So we're preparing our students for the future to be really capable employees, but also to just be understanding peers and be able to be there and work together. Collaboration is something that's very important to the university, I feel like, in regards to inclusive excellence and innovation. So we thought that those values are already there. Let's bring it to the classroom. Let's talk about it. We then first wanted to make this a gen ed requirement, and that it was really tricky. We went to a lot of different committees, a lot of faculty, and talked about the logistics of that, and it's a logistical nightmare to just start a gen ed like that. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I've heard.
Yeah. So after that, we kind of reshifted our focus, and we went to first-year seminar instructors. So we thought, well, let's get all of the first-year students coming in, so they have to interact with that when they come in. They can't just opt out. We want, to be frank, we kind of wanted to put this in front of all of our students' faces, in a sense, because we feel it's very important for our students to engage with diversity and inclusion. So after that, we began to kind of work with that. We met with Dr. Marche Fleming Randall, the Chief Diversity Officer, quite often, and she said, all right, well, you have to come up with a proposal, make sure it's airtight, and you know what you're doing, what you want. And that really, really helped us. I really do appreciate Dr. Marche's expertise and help with us, because we then arrived to this idea of creating a week-long set of programs that are student-led, student-centered, to address these issues and to kind of highlight and celebrate the diverse experiences we have on our campus. It's no secret that Wichita State is the most diverse state university in Kansas, so we want to highlight that, and that's why we're choosing and being intentional by having it being student-centered and student-led. We've reached out to a lot of student organizations, departments that are very student-facing, and we're empowering students within those organizations that are heavily involved with these departments to lead and kind of express themselves through these events. So we're really excited to see how that will happen next fall, September 13th through the 17th. We have a lot of student organizations and student departments, as I said, that are already on board and creating a lot of programs to showcase these students and their experiences, because we know every shocker has a very different experience, but it's important to celebrate them and uplift them all.
Absolutely, and I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm going to be a part of it in the fall, so
Yeah,
looking
that's
forward
amazing.
to it.
I'm so eager to hear, to see how that turns out. As you've been doing, this important work, what challenges or what barriers have you all faced as you've been trying to get this going?
Well, first, as I mentioned earlier, is the logistical part of that.
Sure.
Bringing in people to kind of educate in itself is a difficult concept and a logistical nightmare, like I said.
Right.
So that has been hard, but that's why we wanted to focus this on programming and having these events happen that are student-led. A lot of student organizations or departments that students are already involved with already do a lot of programming and put on a lot of great events on our campus. We looked at the climate survey, the most recent one in 2019, and most student respondents said that they learned from diversity issues by a peer or by attending events on campus. So that is already there. We wanted to just put it all in one place and kind of make sure our instructors know about it and are able to tell our students. So that was an issue too. And it was kind of a challenge, but thankfully, we've met with a lot of people within the kind of academic side of the university. Provost Shirley Lefevre has helped out a lot. She's gotten us in front of a lot of people. We've done that too, just engaging with different people, different faculty, staff, and just getting help and input. We are students at the end of the day, so this is kind of a new thing for us to put on, and that's a challenge in itself. I mean, we only have so much time in a week to work on this, so that was another challenge. But luckily, we've been advised by a lot of wonderful faculty, staff, administrators that have helped us. And then lastly, I think is just the recruitment, in a sense, of going to these different organizations, these different departments, and getting them on board. Luckily, all of these great groups are about it. They care about this work too. And as soon as we mentioned it, they're like, yeah, 100%, we're on board. We have a group of students. We've already been talking about it. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out.
I think you guys have been doing great. I know it's a lot of work, and I think you guys have been doing phenomenal, just trying to spearhead this major initiative that is university-wide. So, Kevin, we're going to shift the focus back to you. So as we record, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. And not only that, but we are currently in the process of the nation experiencing and seeing the trial of the police officer responsible for killing George Floyd. So with that being said, between the pandemic, the rise in the racial tensions over the last year, how has that impacted the work that you do as community engagement coordinator?
I wouldn't say that it necessarily has impacted it one way or another. When we say rise of racial tensions, I don't even really see a rise in racial tensions. I think there's always been racial tensions. Yeah. It's just now televised.
Right.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the podcast, yeah.
And so, and I'm a little older than you, Bob.
A little bit.
So I'm born in '69, and if you look at that decade in the '60s, you see the Voters' Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Medgar Evers. So I'm born at the tail end of a pretty tumultuous, racially tense time, and I don't think I've ever noticed it really dying down. But as far as it being highlighted and televised, it hasn't really changed the work that I do. It has created a lot of more, interest and popularity of other people working in that space. So I see a lot more involvement in that space, which is a good thing. On the flip side of that, it often causes some frustrations because I see some people who aren't sincere. Some people are there because, hey, I want to help. I didn't know this was going on. And other people see, hey, I can build my resume off of this, and my pain shouldn't be your resume. But definitely, I embrace all the help we can get because, I hate social injustice. I hate oppression, whether it's against me or someone else. But at the same time, it is frustrating because some people are transparent. You can see when someone's there just because, hey, here's my chance to be popular. And that's not what it's about. Yeah.
So let's kind of turn that inward for a second. So with your positionality and being a black man in this role and seeing and experience what you have experienced, specifically, how has your life experiences impacted the role in the work that you do currently?
I think I see it and have always felt frustration about it, and a lot of times I've always felt like no one heard my cries. No one has felt my pain. And so now I think now that my pain is highlighted, it's showcased,
Right. Absolutely.
it's real. So it legitimizes, things that I've cried about ever since I probably was in the second or third grade. And so I think that puts a greater emphasis on the work that I do. And I think it gives me a greater sense of empowerment. And it kind of even refreshes me because sometimes that work is difficult.
Yeah.
And so I can do that with a greater sense of empowerment. But other than that, though, I think the work stays the same. But definitely, I think the support has increased for the work.
Now, as an individual who, from my perspective, I see making great strides in our community and on this campus, you live this life.
Right.
This is who you are. Does it ever get to a point for you where it's exhausting? It's tiring?
No, I wouldn't want to be anybody other than me. It gets frustrating.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't get tiring. I think if I have to. So my great grandmother, she was the child of a slave. And she died when I was in the 11th or 12th grade. And so I had living and breathing conversations with a slave. So my oppression does not compare to hers, or my parents who went to segregated schools, or my grandparents who even had it worse than them. So society is moving forward. And so I'm proud to take the baton that I was handed and hopefully pass it off to my daughter, who will have a easier race to run than I have, because I think we're moving in the right direction. But on the flip side, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, speaking of passing the baton and the work that's being done, David, the stuff that you guys are doing has not gone unnoticed, and it's making waves here on campus.
Yeah, thank you.
So my question for you is, what impact or what legacy, so to speak, do you hope that your work is going to leave on this campus when you're done?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I kind of mentioned it earlier when I was speaking, but a lot of the impacts we want to have with this initiative, with this Diversity Week, is one, that students are more engaged and involved with resources, services, offices, departments, people, you name it, that want to help and support them. They provide resources for them. As a first-generation son of immigrant Latino student, I know that these resources, these people are in my corner, and I'm very glad that that is here on the campus. But I want other students to know that and to see a David Garcia or another student that represents another identity that has someone in their corner and know that they are someone on this campus for them. We also want other students that may not have an identity like that to still engage and learn. Like I said earlier, going to a university, going to college is a very socializing, educational time. So we want that education to be there for all of our students so we can all really take it in. We also want empathy to be built. We know that every experience for a Shocker is different. We are all Shocker Nation, but that means something very different for all of us in this room even. So we want students to understand that it's different. There's a lot of different challenges, and there's some privileges as well that come for different people and different Shockers. So we want that to happen. We also want some conflict resolution skills to happen. A lot of this work ties back to when we were doing some research and looking at the climate survey, which I didn't really go into it too deeply last time. It is a survey that the university does every 3 years to look at the kind of the climate of our campus. So that includes issues related to DEI topics, stuff in the classroom, whatever, you name it. And one thing we saw is that most instances of discrimination, bias, or harassment are from students. It's peer-to-peer, 33%. That was the plurality for all. It's coming from peers to peers, and that was really disheartening for me to see as a student, because that's what I love the most, is the people here, is engaging with my peers, saying hi to my friends on campus, learning together, growing together, and to see that most of these terrible things are coming from other students really, really hurt me, and that kind of inspired this work. So we want that we want that number to go down. We want people to talk about it and to be about it. With that, another number that really hurt me to see is that most students don't report this or don't even tell like a friend or a family member, an administrator, an advisor. It just goes unchecked. So we want students to call it out and be there for each other. This sense of community that we've been talking about is what makes this place great. It's what makes Wichita State great, is that people are there for each other. So we want students to stand up for each other, stand up for what's right, and be there and support each other. And lastly, like I said, is to help students work and interact with a diverse network. We have a lot of students coming from all over the world even. So for a lot of students, we're interacting with people that we've never really seen or met with for the first time ever. So building that capacity to listen, to be respectful, and to understand one another is kind of ultimately the legacy we want to have.
That's excellent. You know, as we near the end of our time with you both, something that Bobby and I really try to do on this show is to leave our listeners with some tangible ways that we can get involved, some tangible things that we can do to continue the work of the issues and the initiatives and the work, that's being done. And so, Dr. Harrison, I'll pass this over to you. Can you give us maybe some ways or some ideas on how we can support the work that you all are doing and how we can get involved on bettering our campus?
I think sincerity is a key thing. I think, anyone who desires to see, the campus and the community surrounding the campus move in the right direction, in a positive direction, has to start out by really being sincere and knowing that that's what they want. And then secondly, reach out. I'm very accessible and I don't have all the answers. And so I would love to hear other solutions. I would love to collaborate, whether it be an individual or an organization. Reach out to me, kevin.harrison@wichita.edu. Everyone that reaches out is not sincere. I've had people reach out before that have had ulterior motives, but I would say that would probably be the biggest thing, is just to reach out. Let's talk about it. Let's collaborate. Let's come up with some solutions together.
I love that you pitched our show name there. Let's talk about it. Didn't even mean to do that.
No,
Didn't even mean to.
Plug. So, David, I'm going to pass this last question on to you. When you think about social justice and some of the things that we've seen as a country and as a community, how has the last year impacted you directly as a student on this campus?
Well, that's a heavy question. It's been kind of exhausting in one sense, but also inspiring in another sense. I don't know if those are the right words to use, but it's tiring. It feels like stuff like this keeps on happening. And as a young person that wants to see our country, our state, our community, our campus be better, it kind of hurts to see these injustices continue to happen. But also it inspires me, like I said. I think the best change that we can make is by making our slice of the world better. So that's why it's really inspired me to make my slice of the world, Wichita State, better. And I hope that through this Diversity Week, through having dialogues, discussions like these, and by going out and getting involved, learning some more, taking some time to realize that you are in your own bubble sometimes, but like spaces like a university, like a college campus, are really easy ways to go out of your way to learn a little more, to engage with people you've never engaged with. So doing that and at the end of the day, just always learning and having that growth mindset, it's really impacted me as a student in my last year here. That's kind of why I want to leave with this legacy of growing and learning. So yeah, I think that's been the main impact for me as a student.
Amazing. So one of the things and that Jessica and I try to really do intently is whatever topic that we're having, and just having people who are living and breathing these experiences and or doing the work. So I have firsthand experienced everyone that we've had on today's show doing the work that they're here talking about so passionately. So when Kevin had made the comment about just being sincere in general, I thank you guys for just being sincere in the work that you do and living it, not only on this campus, but off of this campus. Right. So that doesn't go unnoticed by me, definitely, and by the folks that know you guys. So thank you guys so much for joining us today to discuss the many facets of social justice and how we can move forward with the work that is being done on this campus and in our community.
Yes, and thank you to all of our guests on the show today, and thank you also to our listeners for tuning in. We're halfway-ish maybe into season 2 at this point, and Bobby and I kind of challenged ourselves to hit some harder, heavier topics in season 2 than we did in season 1, and just more complex issues that don't, that have a lot of facets. And so I appreciate all of our listeners for kind of being along in this journey with us. We learn from every single episode that we record, and I hope that you all do too. So as always, please share us with your friends if you're finding value in the content that we're creating. And have a good one, and always join us next time on Let's Talk About It. Bye.
Bye.